Hi, my name is Peg Siciliano. I am a board member of the Traverse Area Historical Society and past archivist of the Society. We are offering a few small vignettes of the information that we usually give in our very popular Oakwood Cemetery tours with a Halloween twist. Whether you watch these at Halloween or some other time, there will be a lot of fun information and good historical information. We are standing at the Traverse City State Hospital Monument. In this plot, there are 470 bodies of patients who were not claimed by their families when they passed away. The Traverse City State Hospital opened in 1885 and closed a little over 100 years later in 1989. When it first opened, it held 500 patients. At its peak, it could serve 3,000 patients at a time, and during the over 100 years that it was open, 50,000 patients passed through its doors. Originally, the hospital was called the Northern Michigan Asylum for the Insane. As psychiatric philosophies changed over the years, it received two other names. Most of the time, it was known as the Traverse City State Hospital, and then closer to the end of its existence, it was called the Traverse City Regional Psychiatric Hospital. The reason these bodies are here is because at the time that they passed away, the families had either moved away or they were not interested in claiming the bodies. The bodies were buried here between 1885 and 1916. After 1916, the bodies were donated for anatomical research to various universities. The Traverse City State Hospital holds a very interesting place in the history of Traverse City. When it opened under Dr. Munson, it was really ahead of its times in how it served its patients. Dr. Munson believed that in order to improve people's psychological health, you wanted to have them in a place of beauty and kindness. And while we may look back at those times now, and they seem somewhat horrific if we think in terms of electric shock treatments, or we think of how there were bars in the windows and all that kind of thing, we have to remember that at the time, up until the 1950s, 60s, they didn't have medications to treat people with psychological illnesses. So what they did, which that may seem harsh to us today, was actually an attempt to help these people at that time. And Dr. Munson and the hospitals of that time were actually in advance of what happened before the mid-1800s, when people that had these kinds of illnesses were actually usually sent to jail and just locked up. However, that sort of dual opinion that or feelings that we have about the hospital leads to a lot of different kinds of stories floating around. Certainly, the hospital served thousands of patients well and gave them good treatment. On the other hand, especially at Halloween time here in Traverse City, a lot of people tend to think of the hospital as somewhat of a spooky place, and they dig up the old stories and legends and that type of thing that are attached to the hospital. It's interesting because the villages at the Commons now generally sort of try to downplay that, and we can understand that in terms of marketing to people to live there. There is, of course, a small chunk of people who would find that very interesting and perhaps want to live there in terms of the possible hauntings, but for most people it's probably not a really good marketing strategy. But today we are going to talk about two of those stories and whether there's any truth to them or whether they're just fun legends. So one of them is about the hippie tree, which is in the woods, in the hills, up above to the west of the hospital. And today it is painted with all different colors, and the legend that goes with it is that way back in the early 1900s, two boys from Traverse City disappeared. And the story goes that they went up in the woods behind there, and eventually they were found dead, and their bodies were, of course, brought back to their families. And then, based on that, what we now know, erroneous story, this whole idea opened up about the bodies were found next to this tree, and if you did the right kind of chants and danced around and stuff, you could open the gates to hell. Now, why anybody would want to do that is a little bit beyond me, but at Halloween time and other times of the year, sometimes people just like scaring themselves. We have done research in the newspapers from the years that those boys apparently or supposedly disappeared, and there were no disappearances. So this is a story that was made up sometime probably in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s, and has sort of held on down through the years. It's basically harmless as long as you don't attach it to the value of the psychiatric care that was given to the patients that went through the state hospital. One other story that people share, sort of multiple stories, are stories of doors slamming when there was no one there, people hearing screams in the windows, seeing lights going through the building. Yeah, some people believe in those things and believe that there truly were hauntings, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it couldn't be possible, but there tends to be the other side of the story that says, there's logical explanations of someone having a radio on, thinking it was screams, a watchman going through with a light, that kind of thing. So I think we can look at our state hospital grounds and the wonderful things that the Minervinis have done and see it as a place of beauty, and still use it as a little bit of a place where we can have a little fun and just realize that legends are legends.